Hey guys, we are Parks and Tech, and our project is updating the Denver Water Quality Basin Scorecard. So our members are Elizabeth Buheim, me, Blake Knipple, John Jordan, Kirsten Mertz, and Tori Brown. And our client for this project was Colin Bell, who works at the Denver Office of Green Infrastructure. Our problem statement was to update the City of Denver's Water Quality Basin Scorecard while reformulating and reweighting different categories and creating a model to hopefully expedite the process in future years. And as just a quick reference, here is the Denver Water Quality Basins, just showing the different areas that each of the basins encompass. And basically, yeah, it was the basis for our analysis. So a quick overview, the City of Denver works with the Office of Green Infrastructure to make sure that all regions of the city have the green infrastructure and water quality that they need. And so to make sure they are investing in the regions that need the most help or most investment, they have created a water quality basin scorecard that indicates whether a region is low, high, or medium priority based on a set of criteria. So these criteria are broken down into primary and secondary. In the past scorecard has involved 75% of this primary criteria, which is basically stormwater runoff and different water quality variables, while the secondary data accounts for 25% of the total score, and is community-driven data. But part of our project was to rescore and reanalyze the past scoring techniques. My apologies for the quick scrolling, but so yeah, the last scorecard was updated in 2016, and now all of this data is outdated. And also the program goals have shifted as the city wants to account more for adapting to climate change and improving green infrastructure overall. There's also been a formal equity index that the team wanted us to incorporate into the social economic variables used in the analysis. So more formally, the Office of Green Infrastructure asked us to make changes to the scorecard, specifically accounting for changes in the impervious cover since 2016, changes in existing water quality treatment facilities, like I said, integrating this new equity index into the analysis, and then switching the weights of different criteria. So giving greater weight to social variables, greater weight to the urban heat island, de-emphasizing the importance of dry weather outfall monitoring data, and basically just updating any data and sources that were not previously mentioned, but will be part of the final scoring of each of the basins. And here we have a breakdown of all of the criteria. You can see the primary and secondary categories. We split up the analysis of all of the different categories among all of our group members so that we could hopefully get basically just more done and then come together at the end and produce a final updated scorecard.
All right, so being a humanitarian group, one of the biggest categories we wanted to look at and change was the social justice aspect of evaluating these water quality basins. So as you can see here in the top scorecard, the original social justice category was only 5% of the total possible weight on the scorecard. And on top of this, that original score was only based off of the HUD area statistic that's a measure. So it only looked at the income levels of different areas as a measure of social justice. The new scorecard, which I can scroll, incorporates the DOTI Equity Index, which was put into place by Denver looking at a more comprehensive approach to social justice. And it includes anywhere from traffic safety to the percentage of minority populations, even includes disabled populations, 11 different categories that all go into making a more comprehensive social justice look at all these different water quality basins. So then this goes into, this is all being factored into our new scorecard that we hope to create. And then from this, hopefully we gain a little bit more headway into looking at the social justice aspect of this new water quality basin. And we'll go into that a little bit more down below. But now we can look at some of the analysis starting on this scorecard.
Awesome. Yeah. So as one of my criteria, I looked at the the regions and basins with that were a 303D listed water body, which basically means that it has a higher concentration of E. coli than is deemed acceptable by the city. And it's a pretty simple analysis. When basins have water bodies within this list, within the 303D list, they receive a score of 5. And when they do not have bodies on this list, they receive a score of a 0. So to perform this analysis, if I can scroll, I created a model. I started off with data from the Denver Open Data Catalog, which was in the form of an Excel file. I then filtered it on Excel to give just the data points that had to do with E. coli concentration. This was then input to my model, which used spatial joins summarized within, and then eventually output 2 Excel files. These Excel files contained the water quality basin name and then the final score. And then this was, the table for this is depicted below. And this was then re-uploaded back in ArcGIS to show the following map. So you can see how the different points show the water quality, or the water bodies that had a higher than acceptable concentration of E. coli, as well as the basins that then received a score of a 5. In red, the green basins received a score of 0 in this category. And then the other 2 criteria I looked at were the transportation pollutant index and the existing treatment. For the transportation pollutant index, this was done in the previous scorecard by using data for total vehicle miles traveled in the different basins. Current data was not available on the Denver Open Catalog or provided by the city when requested. But this analysis, as shown in the scorecard, should be pretty straightforward, as it is just a summing of the total vehicle miles traveled in the different basins and then normalizing it for the basin area. So this is part of the future work that can be done with the project. And as well as existing treatment, the shapefile for the 2014 existing treatment was shared with us, but the Denver Open Data Catalog did not have the same data type available. It had a water quality layer, but it varied significantly and had very different regions than the layer shared with us in 2014. So when the data is available in the same format and the data created by the same entity, basically from the analysis of the 2014 data, there's a couple steps that need to be taken in the future analysis. First is making sure and sorting out the status of the project as seen in the this attribute table, is making sure that is existing treatment and not potential or planned, to ensure that it's the actual area currently and not future, and so that the score reflects the current existing percent treatment of a basin. The second important point was that a lot of the areas overlap each other, since different water quality treatment facilities and different runoffs kind of overlap. So to get an accurate understanding of the percent of the area that is existing treatment, a dissolve layer will be necessary, and then calculate area to find the total area that has existing treatment, which will then allow for the final analysis for that criteria. So yeah, that and again, this can be done in future projects, but a limitation was that we were not able to get the same data as was used, or the same type of data as was used in the previous scorecard.
Hi, so if you're like most people, wet and dry weather flows may sound like a foreign concept. Wet weather flows are simply natural water flows from things like rain and snowmelt. While this type of flow is natural, dry weather flows are not. Dry weather flows are associated with man-made flows like farming, oversprays, and factory discharges. Both of these types of flows can be monitored for pollutants to better understand an area's water quality. Like the previous study, the primary pollutants analyzed were bacteria, nitrogen, phosphorus, and total suspended solids. These were selected as Colorado Regulations 31 and 85 address and stipulate either maximums or recommended maximums for their concentrations in water bodies for the specified water use. Total suspended solids was used as a proxy for metal concentrations, as metals are often found as suspended particles in water flows. Let's see here. So as you can see in here, what's it called? The breakdown on how the weather flows were scored to not only meet the objective of this project, but also to enhance the results. Dry weather pollution loading was de-emphasized. This was primarily done as there was missing data points from some basins. Measuring dry weather flows is very difficult as they aren't readily published by the polluters. As for wet weather pollution, wet weather polluting weighting was only reduced by a third relative to itself, so social issues would have a higher weight. And this can be seen in this table as well. Let's see here. In the following figures, the scores are shown for each pollutant with the wet weather loading data, 1 being the best and 4 being the worst. Can you? Okay. The best basin for E. coli was Gateway. The worst basins were Harvard Gulch, Sanderson Gulch, Upper Cherry Creek, and West Harvard Gulch. The best basin for phosphorus was Gateway, and the worst basins were DIA, Goldsmith Gulch, Harvard Gulch, Sanderson Gulch, Upper Cherry Creek, Valverde, and West Harvard Gulch. As for total nitrogen, the best basin was, again, Gateway, and the worst basins were DIA, Elleria, Swansea, Globeville, Marston Lake, Northeast Park Hill, Sanderson Gulch, Upper Cherry Creek, Valverde, and West Harvard Gulch. And lastly, all basins had a fairly good total suspended solids except for DIA and Elleria Swansea. This makes sense as there aren't as many industrial zones present in downtown Denver areas. In these figures, the monitoring data for the dry weather was plotted. And because there was missing data, the only really important ones were shaded red. For E. coli, the worst basins were City Park, 5 Points, Capitol Hill, Sloan's Lake, Sunnyside, 311, and Valverde. For phosphorus, the worst basins were DIA, Goldsmith Gulch, Harvard Gulch, Sanderson Gulch, Upper Cherry Creek, Valverde, and West Harvard Gulch. For total nitrogen, the worst basins were DIA, LRES, Fonse, Globeville, Marston Lake, Northeast Park Hill, Sanderson Gulch, Upper Cherry Creek, Valverde, and West Harvard Gulch. And lastly, for total suspended solids, the worst basins were City Park, Park Hill, 5 Points, Capitol Hill, Goldsmith Gulch, Harvard Gulch, Overland University, and Veer Gulch. A summary of the wet and dry weather pollution monitoring data can be seen in this table. As you can see, DIA is definitely the worst offender in terms of wet weather polluting, and then the worst couple, I guess, map units were City Park, Park Hill, and 5 Points, Capitol Hill for the dry weather data. Oops. While the team was able to successfully complete the scorecard using the previous study's data, we were not able to find, filter, and update the scorecard with new data. The team will attempt to accomplish this by the final written due date. This maybe have to be a part of a future project.
Hello. So impervious pavement is a surface that prevents the natural flow of water into the ground. The most common way to think about impervious pavement is like asphalt, where something that is permeable would be like the grass outside of our house. So we should care about impervious pavement because especially in urban areas, impervious pavement doesn't allow for water to directly go into the ground from the source, as in like rain or snow melt, and instead this water then travels along like urban areas like roads, like factories, and it picks up all those pollutants that may be lying on the ground, like people that fertilize their lawns or change their oil out on the street, or even just like metal that occurs from daily use of technology can end up on the pavement. So this is a problem because instead of just going into the water table, the water traveling across the pavement picks up all these pollutants and then can go into other sources of water and pollute that water there, or decrease the quality of the environment nearby. So, oh my gosh, there we go. Okay. So, the city of Denver cares about how much impervious pavement that like lies in these basins because implementing green areas to offset the amount of this impervious pavement is really important. And also, like talked about earlier, we want to put more emphasis on like hotter temperatures and urban effects with these hotter temperatures, and also areas with a lot of impervious pavement typically have a high level of civil maintenance cost. So in order to perform analysis, a shapefile with the impervious pavement throughout Denver was used, and in order to find how much impervious pavement was in each basin, sorry, we essentially took a cookie cutter of each basin and then cut out the specific places of impervious pavement in each basin, which calculated how much pavement was in there, and then divided that by the total area of the basin, which then gives us a percentage of impervious pavement in the area. Also, within the data set that we had for impervious pavement, this included different types of impervious pavement that I talked about a little bit earlier about like what is defined as right-of-way surfaces. But the first analysis was just based on the total amount of impervious pavement. So then that percentage was changed into a score that was ranging from 0 to 5, and that the highest score was the worst, essentially. It meant that the basin had at least 65% of its area as impervious pavement or surface. And that means that the city would have to assess how stormwater runoff is doing in that area, and also just residential approval of the high like civil infrastructure and the urban heat island effect. So as you can see below here, we have a chart that describes what score goes with each percentage of how much impervious pavement. The first two scores kind of start out pretty low just because with the scope of the project, especially looking at such a large city of Denver and the surrounding areas, we know that there is a lot of impervious pavement, and we want to really hone in on just the places with more of it, since it's not typical to find just like 2% of impervious pavement in an area. So as we can see below here, I'll scroll down to the colors really quick. So the color red in these maps means that it has the highest score, 5, which is at least 65%. As we can see here, that in the middle, the highest score was achieved just kind of like where you would expect it to be, kind of like in the heart of Denver, and these scores kind of decrease as you go out. One of the most like standout areas is the airport that lies out here, and as we know that airports have a large amount of pavement, but also in that basin there is not much, it's just far away from the city, but it does have a pavement. So the airport itself scored pretty low just based on total pavement, but it is important still for the city to look at how the airport is handling their water and what that means to like implement more like green areas or take care of pollutants that may come from the increase of impervious pavement. So below this, we have a map using the same scoring, but instead this is based on right-of-way pavement, which means that it is streets, alleys, and sidewalks that is meant for public use. And Denver wants to look at these areas because if they're public areas and places that civilians can travel on, they want to improve their public infrastructure versus something that like may be private. And this is just to improve municipal efficiency and residential happiness. So with the analysis, instead of using the total impervious area that incurred in each of these basins, just streets and sidewalks were looked at, just for as like a general analysis because typically sidewalks and streets are like public area and maintained by the city versus something that's private. So as we can see here again, the areas with the most amount of right-of-ways lie in more of like the central heart of Denver, where it gets slowly farther away, where you would expect more green areas, versus in the middle of Denver, where we know that it is just mainly street, sidewalk, and building. So all in all, it's important to look at this because we really want to decrease the amount of stormwater runoff and also increase more green areas in this area. And this side of the project, the reanalysis, focused on more like heat island and the impact of that versus the tie along with water quality and impervious pavement. Since that was talked about previously, it was better to look at just impervious pavement total by itself instead of just another quality within the impervious pavement. So from talking about green infrastructure, we can now move on to the tree canopy and how that relates to impervious pavement.
All right, so the tree canopy is just a little bit, it's just a measure of greenness in Denver. That's what their main goal of looking at tree canopy was just the greenness. So kind of like what Elizabeth was saying, greenness helps reduce heat and it reduce runoff as well when compared to impervious surfaces. So that's why they wanted to look at this. The data actually for this section, like some of the sections above, wasn't actually updated since the last time the scorecard has been done. However, it was interesting to go back and look at the maps to rework kind of these same steps. So when actually measuring the greenness of a particular area, you would take the inverse ratio of the total canopy coverage. So that's just looking at the amount of area in a particular area that's covered by canopy or grass or any sort of biological coverage, and then divide that by the total area in a basin to get a ratio, and then the ratios with the highest number of that greenness compared to area were given a low score because the areas with more impervious surfaces are worse in terms of runoff and that sort of a thing. The heat island effect, if I can scroll down here, is sort of almost looking at the same thing, but just this time when looking at impervious surfaces, another way to measure this would be the amount of heat that this particular area gives off, because the areas that are covered with more impervious surface trap, retain, and reflect more heat from the sun than biological areas do. So the city of Denver actually did extensive research measuring the overall surface area temperatures in all the different basins in 50 by 50 foot grids, and then assign each raster score, looking at defining each as the hottest was given a score of 5, the warm was given 3, and the coldest was given a score of 1. And then that's just a direct measure of how much impervious area each different basin had. Again, this research was also not updated since the first time they took this data back in 2016. But when looking at this scorecard, one of the things they did want us to do was reweight it to give this heat island effect more sway in the overall score. So kind of like the DOTI Index, when we were talking about earlier, that was being something we wanted to reflect more in the total score. This heat island is also another thing that wanted us to have greater impact in the total score. So when looking at the score for this reweighting, both the original score had both social justice and heat island as 5% of the total 100 points, giving each of them 5 points. When reworking this new score, we updated this score so that social justice had 15 points out of the new total 115, and heat island had 10 points. This increases their percentage, so the social justice now takes up 13% of the total score instead of 5%, and the heat island takes up 9%, almost 10% of the total score instead of 5% as well. So kind of doubling the weight on each of these scores when updating the new scorecard. And then moving on to park density.
So to find park density, what we did, or what I did, I suppose, was I collected the ACS, the American Community Survey census data from 2019, which has population not just in totals, but it also has by gender, by age groups, by genders within those age groups. And I took the total population data and found, however, the population for each basin per 10,000 people. I then took the USA Parks map from the Living Atlas, and I found the amount of park area in each basin, and just taking those together through some ArcGIS magic and different spatial joins and things like that, I found the total park area in each basin per however many of 10,000 people. So looking here, right here at 5 Points Capitol Hill, we're showing that the park density was a 2, meaning that it was not in great need of investment for park density. So seeing as it's the lowest, it means that it had the most park area per capita. And if we're looking, oh, I'm sorry, the ones did the Iron Edge Gulch. But if we're looking at the 5s over here, like Upper Cherry Creek, a lot of them, most of the areas, if you look, have 5. I believe this is because the USA Park data was not on the scale of Denver. So there are other parks within these areas. However, they were too small to be impacted on that layer. So to get better data to show, because I don't believe all of these areas need so much more investment for parks, then I think a new layer would need to be developed by going and actually mapping out each park in the Denver area. Further going on, I worked on the Equity Index, which, as Tori discussed above, it's an index that the Denver Transportation and Infrastructure Department worked on to have a better idea of all of the different things that really affect the social justice. So there were 11 subcategories that fed into the 5 main ones of socioeconomic, built environment, access to care, morbidity, and mortality. And through that, you can actually click here to go the link over there. They'll show you all of the different submaps, and it really just created one major map to where they scored them all. So as you see here for Irondale Gulch, it was an equity score of 3. 0 being no need in investment for future equity stabilization, and a 5 being desperate need. So as you can see, there were most areas were 3. There were a few that were 4. So that was how the equity index came into play.
Awesome. So now moving on to results. Let's see. Perfect. So we updated the criteria that we had that new data for, and left the other criteria that either we couldn't find data for or needed further kind of analysis as white, and basically as the 2016 scorecard value still. We re-weighted the criteria that need to be weighted to come up with new final scores for each basin. And these are depicted in this first table showing the basin name as well as the priority. One being high priority in need of investment, and then 31 being low priority. We then put this into a ArcGIS layer, so we can visually see the spread of all the basins and the different priorities. Red being high priority in need of investment, that the upper side of the table, and medium priority, and then low priority. Yeah, my apologies to the scrolling.
All right, so a little bit about the conclusions. So in total, of our original problem statement, reweighting the scorecard, we ended up getting 7 of the 13 scoring criteria for this scorecard finished and updated in some capacity, whether that was taking new data, implementing it, and regaining a new score, or just reweighting the scores and entering that into the new scorecard. That could be seen in the table above. I had control, but on top of this, if we had time, our client wanted us to look at different modeling so that in the future, these different scores could be implemented with more ease. And this was done for a couple of the categories. I know Blake and John looked at this, and that was a good start for sure, and able to hopefully in the future so that people could put in the new data and get scores faster, and this could be updated more quickly. And then on top of this, a new map with this new updated scores was created to look at the, as you could tell by the list above, the different just the different priorities in the basins now, because that did actually shift from 2016. And then, so what still needs to be done, a lot of the challenges we ran into this project were just unable to gain new data so that we could update the different scores. We were able to do this for almost half of our scores. However, there was still a lot of data that we were unable to find, data that we were unable to update. So in the future, if new teams were to take this on, the next steps would be implementing those last few scores with new updated data. So I think there are about 6 categories left that would need this new data, so that going on from there, we would have fully updated scores and map instead of a half updated score. And then on top of this, for each of those new categories, having a model for each of them, so that in the future, if the city of Denver wanted to go back and make a new scorecard, then the models could be used so that you can just input the data, get a new score, and it'd be a lot faster than trying to go through all the steps that we did in this project. So that's a little bit of where we'd want to go from here. However, we did still get a lot done. We almost updated more than half of the scorecard. We got a new map. We got a new list of priorities for the basin. And in total, this was a challenging but very fun project. We hope that somebody can take on from here. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us in the group. Thank you for your time.